This is the most dangerous place humans ever created. And somehow, it has become one of the most hopeful. 40 years ago, in what is now Ukraine, the worst nuclear disaster in history poisoned an entire corner of the continent and forced every living soul to flee. Everyone was certain nothing would survive here for 1,000 years. This is Chernobyl. The families who lived here were given almost no warning. They left with little more than the clothes on their backs, certain they'd be home within days, and were never allowed to return. Mothers, fathers, and children, whose families had worked this land for generations, were scattered across the country. In a single afternoon, their homes left to fall silent. And deep in the forest, they left behind something enormous that no one was ever meant to find. Then the strangest thing happened. With the people gone, the land came back to life on a scale no one thought possible. Wolves now move through the kitchens where families once sat down to dinner, and animals unseen here for 100 years have returned to a place almost no human being is allowed to enter. But the wildlife is only where it begins. The deeper into this forbidden zone you go, the stranger it becomes. Rooms left frozen exactly as they were the morning everyone fled. A whole city vanishing quietly into the trees, and that vast humming shape in the forest that no one has ever fully explained. Every one of them is a piece of the same haunting question the people who lived here are still asking today. What became of the families who once lived here, and of the wild land they left behind, is a story you'll want to see to the very end. Chernobyl is a former Soviet power site turned disaster zone, now mostly empty and fenced off. In its forest stands Duga radar, a steel wall of antennas 500 feet high and about 2,300 feet long. It is the last Soviet over-the-horizon warning system, built to spot American missiles thousands of miles away. The radar bounced shortwave signals off the ionosphere, using the sky like a mirror. Maps hid it under the fake name Chernobyl 2, shown as a children's camp. Its sharp tapping on shortwave radios worldwide earned the nickname Russian Woodpecker. Those signals sparked Cold War rumours about mind control and weather control that were never denied. The soldiers who kept it running slept a short walk away, in a settlement that shared its fake name. Chernobyl 2 village is a secret military town beside Duga, built for about 1,500 workers and families. Prefab Soviet blocks still stand in rows, with classrooms and playgrounds left midday. The fire station sits frozen, trucks and gear ready for alarms that will never ring. A scale model of the Duga radar still sits in the command centre, like a meeting paused forever. None of those families worked at the radar itself. they clocked in somewhere far more dangerous. Reactor 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant failed during a late-night safety test in 1986. The blast blew the reactor open and released radiation hundreds of times stronger than the Hiroshima bomb. Fallout spread across Europe, forcing sudden evacuations and leaving nearby towns empty. Workers rushed to seal the core in a huge concrete sarcophagus around the wreck. Around 600,000 liquidators worked brief, dangerous shifts close to intense radiation. Many later suffered or died from exposure, turning the cleanup into a deadly legacy. That sarcophagus cracked with age within years, so a bigger shield had to replace it. Engineers built that shield somewhere safer, then slid the whole arch into place. The new Safe Confinement is the largest movable structure ever built, tall enough to cover a full sports stadium. It slid over the wreck on rails, sealing the ruins for the first time in decades. Inside, robotic cranes slowly cut up the old concrete shell and damaged reactor parts. It is meant to hold dust and radiation in for about 100 years. No engineer patrols the ground it shadows anymore. That job now belongs to the Grey Wolf. The exclusion zone holds more of them than anywhere else in Europe, about 7 times normal levels. With roads empty and towns quiet, packs roam freely, using streets and tracks as easy paths. Deer, boar and elk feed here in big numbers, giving constant prey around the plant. They keep these herds under control, shaping how much the vegetation can grow back. Pups grow up without fearing people, treating empty buildings as part of their territory. A den has even been found inside one collapsed farmhouse, walls doubling as shelter. Their range reaches a settlement the government chose to bury. Kopachi was the closest village to Reactor 4, so it took some of the worst fallout. Officials bulldozed every wooden house into trenches and buried the whole village under soil. Now only grassy mounds with radiation signs show where streets and homes once stood. Over 1,100 residents lost not just houses, but the entire village they might have returned to. The burial pushed radioactive material into the ground, contaminating the local groundwater. One brick kindergarten still stands, with small beds, shoes and toys left as they were on evacuation day. No farmer can touch that soil, but a herd of Przewalski's horses grazes it every day. These tough animals came from Central Asia, released here in 1998 as the only free-roaming herd on the continent. They cross grass and forest edges freely, using empty roads as their own paths. Foals grow up among warning signs and ruins, never having known a fence. The herds work like natural lawnmowers, trimming meadows no tractor will ever enter again. Their grazing trails end near rusted machines left behind at Burakivka. Radiation soaked into the metal so completely that none of it could be decontaminated. Helicopters, fire engines, and armoured carriers are too radioactive to ever be used again. Trucks and bulldozers sit in long rows, rusting into the soil. Around 1,500 machines fill dozens of trenches, some abandoned after only one flight or one shift. A West German robot called Joker arrived to clear the reactor roof, jammed on its first day, and was left with the rest. What remains above ground will stay radioactive for thousands of years. European bison now cross those same rusting trenches, grazing ground no person can live on. They rank as the continent's largest land animal, reintroduced here in 2014 after disappearing from the wild. Herds move between grass and forest, passing broken concrete and old machine parts. Heavy feeding on young trees keeps clearings open instead of closing over. Calves stay close to adults and learn to avoid wolves in a place with almost no people. Their grazing decides which plants spread and which paths stay open for other animals. A herd like this walking through empty farmland is quietly rewriting the rules of what this land was. Zalissia stood for roughly 400 years, surviving Tsars, famine, occupation, and revolution. It was the largest village in the zone, home to a Soviet rural routine of farms and shared yards. Evacuation came in 1986, with residents told they would return in days, but almost no one did. Streets are now forest paths, and wooden houses sag and collapse under decades of growth. Fruit trees still bloom every spring, dropping crops that only animals and insects eat. Inside the House of Culture, a banner still promises communism to rows of empty seats. Wild boar now move through Zalissia's empty lanes, walking routes villagers once used daily. They dig through old gardens and orchards, feeding on leftover crops and fallen fruit. With no hunters left, their numbers have climbed higher than almost anywhere else in Ukraine. Strong snouts and shoulders tear up soil and rubble, uncovering roots, seeds, and insects. Piglets follow adults closely, learning safe paths through broken fences and overgrown streets. Their rooting reshapes abandoned yards, turning tidy gardens into churned earth. Tracks from these gardens lead straight toward rusting rails, cutting through the trees at Yaniv. It opened in 1925 as the main rail hub linking Pripyat and the plant to the wider Soviet Union. The Moscow Khmelnytsky Express rolled through the radioactive cloud that night, windows open. Within days, all trains were rerouted, and the engines left behind were too contaminated to move. Trees now grow inside carriages, and weeds swallow the tracks. One military vehicle used to fell the red forest still sits here, the most radioactive object in the station. Everyone who watched the reactor burn from the bridge of death absorbed a fatal dose without knowing it. Krasny sits 4 miles from the plant, directly in the path of the first fallout cloud. At its centre stands a wooden Orthodox church built in 1800, surviving Tsars, Soviet rule and disaster. It resisted Soviet demolition orders and outlasted nearly every other church in the zone. Weeds climb its walls and the timber splits, yet it remains one of only 2 churches still standing. A priest returns a few times a year, holding short services for workers and the few allowed to visit. White-tailed eagles now circle above, built for a place with no one left to disturb them. They rank among Europe's largest birds of prey, with broad wings built for slow, steady flight. In the zone, they nest high in tall pines, untouched by logging or nearby farms. Chicks grow in hidden nests, fed on fish and meat from rivers, ponds and fields. Adults patrol water and grassland, taking fish, ducks and carrion other predators miss. Empty space left by people gave these eagles room to spread across the open sky. Their hunting routes cross old collective fields, now wet meadow where crops once grew. Vodka stills once ran on crops from this soil, and now the birds own all of it. These farmlands once ranked among Soviet Ukraine's most productive wheat and sunflower land. Days after the blast, tractors stood mid-field, harvesters stopped where they were, and fruit trees bloomed unpicked. Birch and pine spread across old plots, while other areas turned into wetland and meadow. Once farming stopped, the zone became one of Europe's largest accidental nature reserves. Much of the soil now tests below unsafe radiation levels, yet the land stays officially forbidden. Atomic vodka is distilled from grain grown here, tested carefully to prove it safe. This grain once fed Pripyat, a city raised entirely to house the plant's workers. Built from scratch as a Soviet Atomgrad, it housed Chernobyl's workers and their families. Wide boulevards, mosaics, cinemas, and a river port made it feel less like a company town. Most residents were in their 20s, raising children and working shifts at the reactors nearby. One April morning, buses arrived, and 50,000 people were told to pack for 3 days. They left clothes, toys, and pets behind, expecting to return, but none ever did. Today it stands as Europe's largest ghost city, tower blocks slowly sinking into forest. Trees grow through gym floors and playgrounds, breaking the neat lines of the Atomgrad plan. Pripyat's hospital number 126 filled with victims before the city grasped what had hit it. Injured firefighters and plant workers flooded in, still wearing their reactor gear. Many were already showing signs of severe radiation sickness on arrival. Staff stripped those uniforms and dumped them in the basement, where they remained too radioactive to move. Wards, the maternity wing, and the dental clinic were cleared fast, then left exactly as they stood. Medical records, syringes, and equipment still sit scattered across dusty floors. Beds and stretchers stand in rows, waiting for patients who will never arrive. Some rooms stay dangerous even now, walls and clothing still hot with radiation. Just outside sits Pripyat's amusement park, built for a crowd that never came. It was built for a grand opening on May 1st, 1986, days after the reactor exploded. To calm residents before evacuation, officials switched the rides on for a few hours on April 27th. The yellow Ferris wheel never carried a single paying passenger, stopping after that brief test run. Dodgems and swing rides still stand where workers assembled them, slowly rusting. Grass and trees now push through the concrete, turning the fairground into an overgrown lot. That wheel became the most photographed symbol of the disaster, famous from pictures rather than tickets. A short walk away, classrooms sit frozen mid-lecture at Pripyat schools. "15 kindergartens and 5 schools were abandoned overnight, lessons still mid-flow. Classrooms still hold textbooks, report cards, toys, and drawings exactly where children dropped them. Tiny shoes and coats remain hung on hooks, as if pupils might walk back in any moment. School number 3 stands out as the most unsettling, its floors covered in thousands of child-sized gas masks. Those masks were stored for nuclear drills, later scattered by looters and time. Desks, chalkboards and science rooms sit untouched, marking a childhood that stopped in a single day. While classrooms emptied for good, Luzerny kept its water running for another 12 years. It stayed open after the evacuation, running until 1998 for cleanup crews. Liquidators swam here between shifts, using the water to feel briefly normal. A clean pool sat inside the most contaminated ground on Earth, one calm room in a ruined city. Tiles, diving boards and lane lines remain in place, dry and unused for decades. Empty lifeguard chairs and changing rooms mark the only rest workers found inside the zone. The brown bear had been gone from these forests for nearly a century before the silence brought it back. A fully grown male here can reach 500 pounds, making it the zone's largest land predator. They now move through pine and birch, eating berries, roots, insects and carrion. Cubs follow adults along old tracks, avoiding both wolves and the rare human visitor. Breaking logs and digging for food, they spread seeds and reshape the forest floor. A nuclear accident emptied this land of people and quietly handed it back to predators. Here they live past 30 years, longer than almost anywhere else in Europe. The land they roam was once a working city, cut through by a river that still runs. Pripyat River runs 80 kilometers through the zone, feeding the Dnieper and the drinking water of millions. Radioactive dust fell into the water after the blast, and cesium and strontium settled into the riverbed mud. Authorities feared the current could carry that contamination toward Kiev. Now it winds through oak groves, alder forest, and untouched wetland. More than 400 vertebrate species rely on this valley as a wildlife corridor. At the old port, barges and river ships sit half sunk, swallowed by reeds while the current slips past. The next engineers on this river are not human. Beavers work these riverbanks now, brown fur, flat tails, and teeth built for cutting wood. Once heavily trapped across Ukraine, they crowd these banks in numbers not seen for generations. Dragging branches into streams, they build dams that slow water once free to race through. Block channels flood low ground, turning dry patches into ponds for frogs, fish and birds. In a zone shaped by a nuclear accident, these animals quietly redesign the wetland. Lodges sit low in the water with hidden tunnels, safe homes in a place people cannot occupy. Every dam nudges water that once worried millions toward a city built to replace Pripyat. Slavutych rose from a pine forest as the last city the Soviet Union ever built. Three reactors still needed workers, so this new town gave them somewhere to live. Eight Soviet republics shaped its districts: Armenian stone beside Estonian minimalism, Georgian balconies beside Latvian design. Roughly 20,000 people live here today, many of them children of the disaster who know no other home. Each morning, some commute past the Dityatki checkpoint toward those who never left. So mostly villages hold people who walked back into the zone after evacuation. Most were elderly women who had survived famine and war, choosing radiation over dying far from home. They slipped through the woods, returned to their cottages, and planted food in contaminated soil. Chickens, pigs, foraged mushrooms, and homemade moonshine kept these villages running under an official label of uninhabited. Fewer than 150 remain today, and their memory of this land will vanish with them. Near their doorstep stands a monument built to hold that memory after they're gone. The monument to the third angel rises in rebar and steel, trumpet raised to the sky. Its name comes from Revelation, where a third angel's trumpet turns water bitter and deadly. In Ukrainian, wormwood translates to Chernobyl, the word behind the plant and the disaster's name. Beside it runs the avenue of villages, lined with signs for towns the explosion emptied. Each year, on April 25th, liquidators and former residents walk that avenue, holding beeswax candles. They wait in silence for 1:23 a.m, the exact moment reactor number 4 exploded. This is Chernobyl, a land of hidden wonders and remarkable architectural marvels. Now, if you don't want to miss the most unreal wonders of the Montana, check out this video.